All right, we'll get started here. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you've been having a good conference. I apologize. I actually had to do a sales call yesterday, so I didn't get to get here till this morning, so that's how that works. Today we're going to talk about how you can weaponize your framework, and instead of being reactive to problems and your attack surface, is to be able to use all the data and the signals that you've already got and are planning to get to actually take a proactive view of solving the problems we've got. Okay. So that's me, and all that says right there that I've been doing this for a really long time. So I'm hopeful that I can give you some content and context today to help. And if you have any follow-up questions or you need anything, just let me know. I'm happy to have that conversation. Okay. So your identity posture and program is only as good as the data and the events that you have. And we're always trying to fix number one or number two, right? Who should have access? When should they have access? Why? There's two changes to the approach here that may sound subtle, but they're generational in the difference. Is that when you go talk to your founding fathers and your leadership, they want to know if I'm spending and investing in security, what am I fixing? And am I going to get a return on that investment? No different than if you're buying stocks or putting your money in a savings account. They want to see some tangible evidence of something that really happens. What I'm going to show you today is how you can actually make that a reality. And it doesn't matter about your tech stack. You're going to find out today, I'm only looking at ecosystem and building blocks, and so should you. It doesn't matter which framework you use. It doesn't matter if it's NIST, ISO, whatever it is. As long as you have one, we can apply these same approaches and get to the same results. And what you'll find is if you go hunting for keystrokes and eliminating service tickets, you will then also be able to clean up your data because you will push the keystrokes to the edge from a self-service perspective, and you'll be able to get the right data signals to say, hey, that's not who that's supposed to be, and shut that down right away. Okay. All right. So these are 5 questions you need to ask yourself. Right. Do you have a framework? Yes or no? And do you have the policies for the identity and the access family inside of that framework that the CISO has to worry about, and then ultimately you all have to worry about? Can you acquire all the identity signals? That can be as simple as the authentication to Azure AD, and you're getting it from the Microsoft event log, all the way down to, hey, I've got an active user account here, but they haven't logged in 60 days. And by policy, they should no longer have access to that. You have a signal now that you can weaponize and turn that off and basically enable the framework. Instead of having it be a library, it's actually a proactive framework in a community. All right? Where can I get the data, and how can I make the decisions? And ultimately, where can I get my source of truth and my source of record and my source of identity to be able to make all of those things union? This is the ChatGPT slide. Right? Us humans, we think on the left. We want the data to drive what we're doing on the right. So there is machine learning here, but we don't have to go and say, hey, chat, go find everything and go do it. That's not going to happen, right? But there is a way that you can take the signals and learn from them, regardless of what you want to do. If you want to do a neural network, if you want to use a regular machine learning approach, whatever works best for your framework and the signals that you have. If you have nothing, then something like a neural network that starts from zero to learn organically is the best way to go. If you have a training data set that says, I already have reference data that I can feed to this thing and give me where I want to go, then you can use one that's pretty much off the shelf. Okay? If these two things make sense here, then the rest of my presentation will also make sense. Right? The idea here is on the left, creates keystrokes, creates service tickets. I have a feeling that something's wrong. On the right is like, the data is evidence and proof that I have an event and a signal that I can now do something with and action it. Okay? This is repeatable, it's reusable, it's extensible, and once you put it in, the investment's in place. Okay. I've tried to give you a visualization of the journey for the 8 steps to do this kind of thing. I highly suggest that you look at it, and this can be a business exercise. It can be any exercise that you want to weaponize data, right? So use this in that framework, right? What is the context? In our context, we're trying to take the risk management framework and apply boundaries, signals, and events to take actions. What does that mean? My key performance indicators mean if I can now take keystrokes and events and signals and not have a service desk ticket that my company says costs me internally $250, and I do 100,000 of them a year, and I can push that event and get a 30% yield, I've just saved them $7.5 million. So that's real money, right? And I don't think anybody in the security space would say, well, geez, I never thought about it before, because we don't think like that. We're technicians, right? I want to think about the problem and not how I can actually yield it. Then you visualize it. You apply those two things, the framework and what the KPIs, and visualize exactly on your ecosystem, which I'll show you here in a sec. Visualize where that boundary, those signals, those events, and the actions are going to go. Then you got the action plan, which basically ties number 2 and 4 together. You prioritize which ones are most important. You'll see a slide on here that says the VPN is in the way. The VPN's in the way because it gives you an artificial signal about my IP address, which we know says, hey, I'm in Mexico. It's like, I'm not in Cabo, I'm right here, right? So we need to eliminate the negative or the artificial signals out of this to make it work. Otherwise, you're going to get a false positive or a false negative, and you're not going to have something happen that you should, right? Finally, we build it, we look at it, so we execute it, and then we look at the results, and you can look at it like taking your bicycle with training wheels. I'm going to try and figure out how to ride this bike. By golly, it's actually working. I can keep up on it. I can take the training wheels off. You can then say, okay, I'm going to take that one signal that I just implemented, and I'm going to put it in the entire ecosystem. And then number 8 is the learning loop. This is the machine learning part where I take the data and the signals and do it again, and do it again, until you get to a baseline of performance that you're comfortable with, because the attack surface isn't going to go away. But now you have a basis to actually proactively defend yourself. Instead of waiting for people to try and break your house and get in your door, you're like, I already see you from 5,000 feet away, dude. I got my Ring camera on you, and you ain't stepping foot in my place. Right? And that's the analogy here. All right, so all of these things should make sense, right? This is your world. This is my world. Governance, which is the framework. Directory services, that's all the data management components. That doesn't mean just an X509, right? All data. A data in our world is a signal. Access management, which is both multi-factor authentication and single sign-on. IGA, which is both the governance piece for attestation, but also lifecycle management. Privileged access management, and that can be not just people that have access to servers, but the people who have access to the HR application. So if you think of it that privileged access isn't just our technical world, that's not true. Anything that has intellectual property or can drive a business decision should be considered to be put in here. Because there's a signal. It's like, why did somebody in Cabo just log into ADP as an administrator? And then the last one, SIAM. If you have a customer base that you want to manage, this is ripe for getting rid of service tickets, action plans, and keystrokes. If you can give them an app store to consume what you're giving your customers as services and let them self-register and self-manage themselves, that's where you want to go. All right, so this one is the high-level one. We all have to worry about the next 2 levels down. I'm not going to roster the 50 things on here. You guys have, I believe, have access to the PowerPoint. But there are things here from the top on the left-hand side that give us the signals and the boundaries for the definition from the risk. So this is almost the dictionary, if you will, of the events that you can look at to see where I want to weaponize the framework. So this is a bit of the recipe that you want to look at. Okay. These 6 things are the 6 of the things that we all struggle to try and solve. I want to automate my stuff. That means the data has to be good. Because if the data is no good, I don't care what you just bought, it ain't going to work. So if I'm going to over-rotate on anything, my advocation to you is to make sure that the data is of quality and of consistency. And that if you get a job description or a job title, it has context to it, that it's a drop-down for somebody to put in instead of somebody just typing in, hey, I'm the boss today, right? That doesn't work. Your source of truth for third parties, that is stretching the world as we know it. You have to manage not only your workforce, but your extended workforce. Hey, Steve. So we have to figure that out. It can't be an orphan. Because these people, if you're bringing them to do a staff augmentation on a very specific thing, that means they're doing something important. They're not just doing something trivial, they're doing something quite interesting. Your privileged access management implementation hasn't gone as far as it's supposed to be able to manage the people that have access to things that they should and potentially shouldn't have access to. The rollout isn't done. And the last two are pretty obvious. We've all been in companies that are 40, 50, 60 plus years old when a floppy drive was this big and you had to turn it like that. So there's still homegrown applications in COBOL. Our Internal Revenue Service gives you your stuff that way, still today, right? So you have to look at how we're going to manage and or take the framework and embrace it instead of saying, well, that thing is so friggin' old, I don't even want to touch it. That's not going to work because there's signals in there you've got to figure out because it's a data-driven process. It's cut and paste checks, right? So there's people that want to weaponize and get to that. You've got to figure that out. Right? And the fine-grained attributes across the enterprise. So when you look at these things that come in for single sign-on MFA, they still have to then be connected to homegrown apps. And the homegrown apps say, hey, if you're in accounts payable, I need to know these 3 other things about you from a fine-grained perspective in order to make sure you can actually do your job, right? So if we understand that well, then we can actually put that into the lifecycle management component or the App Store, wherever you're going to onboard these people, and you can send all that data through the token. And now the authentication and the authorization can then be seamless and repeatable because now I've got the data dictionary for the person in the right spot instead of being fragmented all over the place. All right. So for us to get started, we've got to do these 4 things. We got to get the data. We got to get the data right. We got to make sure we've got good connective tissue between things, whether that's tokens or SCIM or anything that is available from an industry perspective. I'm not a fan of having to do one-offs because if the industry says, hey, this is the protocol we're going to use, that means that everybody that has given you products that you've invested in are supporting those. And you should take advantage of that. That's just not one of those ticks in the boxes. It really does make sense. And then what use cases are you going to weaponize? Where am I going to go with this thing? Am I going to go for the number one problem I have, which is passwords or weapons? Anytime somebody tries to break into my Surface attack, there's a password associated with that. How do I fix that? That would be one of the ones. Number 2 for me is the VPN. I don't want somebody spoofing me, saying they're actually in the building when they're not. And the VPN will give you a false ghost signal. Okay? So you need to take a step back and say, okay, which ones of those are mine? That I want to take the framework by policy and be able to then apply that and implement it so I can actually drive return on investment. The VPN's in the way. My father's implementation's on the left, and I'm an old guy, right? This is how we all consume applications and information today, on the left, on the right, sorry, right? It's everywhere. And if there's a VPN in the way, it's giving me a false signal that says, Bill is not in Vegas today, he's in Minneapolis, but I was in Minneapolis yesterday. I need to know right where I am, when I am, who I am, how I am. And if I can't answer those questions, you should be able to put your CASB or your policy manager in there and say, okay, I have a signal I can do something with because somebody's trying to do an attack surface, or I'm not sure exactly who that person is. The second part of this is as you look at this, you need to start thinking about how your business runs from an authentication perspective, if you can authenticate the device and the person, I have a binding now that is unique and specific. And now I have a token of time that I can say that binding's in place and I can actually do something. If I don't have that binding, there's another signal that's in the boundary, right? You got a boundary, even though I didn't draw a boundary over there, you have a boundary. And if I see that signal, what do I want to do about it? Do I ask them to say, hey, I need some more information from you? Or do I say, hey, no, can't come to that door because that application you're trying to get to doesn't support you not being able to give me the information necessary? This is where you can decide your best return on investment, because you've already spent the money here. You already have the framework in place. You already have the policies in place. You just haven't weaponized it to be able to defend yourself. You're just assuming somebody's knocking on the door all the time. Just take the gun and shoot them. You don't have to wait. All right. So here we go. Ecosystem. These 14 building blocks service the right-hand side, because these are all your applications. These are what's getting consumed. In no particular order, on the left-hand side, I have my source of truth. I've got my org chart, my human resources, my recruitment, my mergers and my acquisitions, and my PMO. If I don't get this data done correctly and repeatably, governed well, you will not have a data-driven process. You'll have the POS that you have, which is, I'll say, is not point of sale. And I can't fix it without investing and partnering with the right people in here. When we talk to Fortune 500 companies and small companies, the leaders of human resources now understand how important it is for them to become and be partners in this journey with the identity and the security teams, because they know that they're the gatekeepers and they're not just owning paychecks and benefits anymore. They actually own the boundary of what can be done. And if you put it to them in that context, they understand it, especially at the leadership level. Maybe not 2 or 3 levels down, but if you talk to the leader of that point of workforce management, they get it. And they're willing to partner to make sure that the quality and the context of the data is correct and usable. Organizational change management, I put that in here for a reason, because it's there. If we do our jobs well and we put this in place, we have basically changed the way our organization will manage access, because we'll actually know what's going on now. We'll see the signal, we'll do it. You've got GRC and your auditing teams, they're your partners too. They would love to see the evidence of this, right? If they do an assessment or they're doing an internal audit, they're looking for this data. And if you can say, guess what, here it is. Here's the evidence of everything we've just done that is actually traceable and repeatable and integrated with the risk framework that they helped put in place. Yep. It's time for an early dinner. Okay. Oh, I can't see without my glasses on. Okay. The 3 pieces on the other side, that's us, right? That's information technology. That's your ITSM, whether that's ServiceNow or whatever you're using tickets for. And it's your SIM. Your SIM is your best friend, because you're going to marry the risk framework and the policies into the policy engine with the data you're getting from the SIM. The SIM has to get all the signals and put them in a place where you can now weaponize and activate this to be able to keep people away from that. And if you heard me anything today, and I do short and sharp, so I'm going to give you some time back, as you can tell this morning. If you see it, it will happen, right? You can just pick one use case, and the one I always use is somebody hasn't logged in for X number of days, right? The way we can do that is, I know on the IT side the last time I logged into my email, whether it's Gmail, whether it's O365, I know that. I've got that. Get that into the SIM, apply the policy that says, when's the last time that person came in? And then as soon as you see it, you can either set a GPO right into Azure if you want and says, hey, if they haven't logged in, boom, they're disabled. Or you can proactively go through into your IGA tool and have the LCM deactivated that way. Right? That's an easy one. But you know how much money you'll save? It's crazy. The second one is password management. Where do I go to give people the tools and the capability to manage their own effing passwords? Where am I going, right? I can see the signals. I've got it in the boundaries. Just move that service desk function to the edge and make it self-service. Now your return on investment is how many password changes come into the service desk today that won't come in tomorrow, times X. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next thing, right? So, the 5 pillars of identity, you see that there. Nothing new there, but you see where I have inside the identity boundary and space, and that is the machine learning. You have to get the data, you have to apply the framework, you have to define your policies, and then let the data tell you where to go. And it's happy to tell you where to go, and it's happy to tell you where you can't go, right? If you can get the top and the left-hand side done correctly and you get a level of accuracy and context from a data quality and governance perspective from that group of people, guess what? You have rinse and repeat on your framework now. I've got this one, I can do that one now. What about this one? Oh, we always have a problem over here because we do that once a year instead of once every week. Probably the most interesting thing that I found in going through this with our partners and with our customers is the recruiting cycle. I know when that person says, yes, I'm coming on board. So instead of the calisthenics and the jumping jacks that we have to do to get day 0 and day 1 access for somebody, why not set up a link to that person to their phone or their personal email that says, welcome to company A. Click on that link. We will send you your stuff. And you can set it up that based on the IP address and where they're at. If they're inside the building interior, then they can actually have access to it and not before. So you can put the policy by date, by time, and by location that link's not available until then, but they can still see it. And if they try and hit on us, you can tell them that. Right? How many service tickets do you get for birthright apps? Hey, I don't know my password on day 1. Now you've just put it in the framework. You've taken out all that friction. And now you've made that person be self-service because the first thing they're going to do is change their password. And now you've applied return on investment. I, on purpose, did not put any product names on here, and that's for a reason. Every single one of you in this room has this. And this. Pick the parts of the framework and that make sense and apply them. This is not hard work. It's not as difficult. If you've got your SIM, if you've got your CASB, and you've got your actions, you can make that all happen. Okay. So the call to action is really going back to a few slides ago. Take the 3 or 4 slides that I gave you before that and apply it in your own place. Blank piece of paper, whatever you want to do. Just do the bench test to see how you can make that flow. I can guarantee you that there's plenty of CIOs that don't realize that they've got the policy in place for people that shouldn't have access, and we didn't just put it in. It's just a piece of paper and a policy. We didn't even think about doing that part, right? And ultimately, this is your journey. My job is to try and help you be a Sherpa, be your Sherpa to help do that. But this is how you can do that and activate it. And basically be able to go to your leadership and say, you've invested in all this cool stuff, and guess what? We're going to give you an annuity back because we figured out a way to not only protect better, but also enable better to the edge. So, with that, I want to thank you very much. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer it.